Temporary challenges posed by the pandemic have already resulted in permanent losses for some businesses. To prevent that worst case for businesses in Faneuil Hall Marketplace, the Boston Planning and Development Agency is trying to get more relief from the site's operators for local merchants. To share part of that story is one of the merchants, Mike Lamatina, the owner of 3 businesses in Quincy Market: Boston Chowder, Wicked Lobster, and Doghouse. Thank you very much for being with us, Mike.
Thank you very much for having me.
Mike, a lot of us who spend most of our lives in Boston, we think of Faneuil Hall Marketplace sometimes as a tourist destination, but there's a local element here, especially about the merchants. And you're, I guess, a second generation merchant. So tell us how that all got started.
My dad built Boston Chowder Company in 1986. We had won the first chowder contest at the Boston Common about a year prior to that, with a restaurant that we owned up in North Andover called the Loft. He thought that the chowder that we were serving should be put out to bigger population than just the Merrimack Valley. He thought Quincy Market was a perfect location for it, and we opened it under Bay State Chowder Company. And then we went to Kitchens of the Bay State, and then to Boston Chowder Company. We hired a marketing firm, helped us change our name. I started working there when I was about 16. My sister Julianne, her current husband started working there in high school. My wife, she worked there with me in high school. Quincy Market was our lifeblood. We talked about it 24 hours a day. And that's how it really started, was with winning the chowder contest in Boston and then putting it out in the Quincy Market.
Well, it's one thing to ask the operators to prop up businesses that aren't doing very well, but before the pandemic struck, how were you doing?
Oh, it was phenomenal. We just opened up Wicked Lobster in March. Actually, yeah, it was in March of last year, and it was doing awesome. Boston Chowder was doing great. Tourism was up. The whole hall itself was doing well, and then everything just got pulled out from underneath us in February, basically. When the flights from China and other countries were put on hold, we lost a huge tourist base. The hotels closed. The hockey games, nobody coming in for those games. No one coming in for the Celtics. No tour buses. No Carnival cruise lines. Nothing was coming in for tourists, and we dropped down to about 85% of what we were doing from the previous February. And then from there, it was really struggling because our help was really getting scared. They were afraid because of the tight quarters. I mean, the restaurants within the hall are tiny. Most of them are around 600-700 square feet. We're producing, going through so many thousands of customers a day. So you have to have a decent staff back there. The conditions are pretty, they're hot. There's not a lot of ventilation that comes through there. So wearing masks was troubling for them. And they were just scared. A lot of them had parents that were living at home. They were elderly. They're afraid of bringing it home. We cut down the staff as much as we could. And then we just said we had to call it quits in March, around the 15th.
Well, it's hard enough for a beloved neighborhood restaurant on Main Street to pivot to takeout only, but I imagine that's even more difficult for merchants in the Faneuil Hall Marketplace.
No one was going to come in and spend $30 to park to come in and get a cup of clam chowder to take home. All the businesses were gone on State Street. Everybody was working from home. So any of the local businesses that would come in, people that would come in, we weren't seeing them. The takeout was virtually impossible. Deliveries were virtually impossible. There was no parking for any of the delivery, Chow Now or any of those to come in and park. And it was a hassle for them. The places that did really well with takeout and delivery were the ones that were already established with that you could pull right up to the business, walk right in, get it and walk out. Well, that doesn't happen in Quincy Market.
Well, in the big picture, it seemed that the federal government was going to send a lifeline to small businesses. Why hasn't this worked out for Faneuil Hall Marketplace?
The rents are the loan that we got was the PPP loan that was for mostly for the your payroll. Our payroll was half of what we owe for rent every month. So it would have covered payroll for about 3 months, and then we would have had no money left for rent. So we decided, so one of the reasons why we didn't put everybody back on the payroll was because of that, because we were thinking that we were going to have to use a portion of this to pay the rents. And at that time, it was a 75-25 split, where 70% of that loan had to go towards your payroll, and the other 25% could go to your operations.
That was to get it forgiven.
And that was to get it forgiven.
And you qualify only if you haven't laid people off too, right?
Right. So we had to lay everybody off. And then it came around again where they did it as a new split where it's 60-40. They extended the amount of time that you had to use it. It was to the end of this year, where before it was what, Lindsay, 3 months?
It was 8 weeks.
8 weeks you had to use it. And it wasn't feasible at all. It might have worked out for the small, takeout place on Main Street, but not in Quincy Market. It was impossible.
And you also have push cart vendors at Faneuil Hall Market. What about them?
They're in the same position. We kind of feed off of each other. The push carts feed off of the food vendors, and the food vendors feed off of the push carts. It's all, it's a symbiotic relationship. It's an attraction. If one of the attractions is gone, then it hurts everybody.
Of course, this takes us next to what the operator of the marketplace, Ashkenazi Acquisition Group, wants from the merchants and what the merchants want. What do you have in mind?
Well, we're looking at not paying rent at all for the rest of this year into next year, or a 10% rent. Like I said, we were in there the other day, and if it's any indication of what it's going to be for the rest of the summer, we're gonna lose money, and the place is going to get shut down. We do all our business from usually May through October, and the money that we have to save to get us through the winter, we're not going to have it. We're not going to have it. We're not going to even have July's rent. So I don't know what we're going to do. And I'm speaking for everybody in Quincy Market. We had a great meeting yesterday with all the merchants, and we're all together in this. We're a big family. We're working hard, really hard, to keep our businesses and our families afloat.
Well, the BPDA certainly wants more time to put off paying the rent. They also want some more help for businesses that might have some capacity to expand outside. What about that kind of offer?
To expand outside, I mean, as far as that goes, the only places that are really going to be able to expand outside are the full-scale restaurants that are on the corners of, on each side of Faneuil Hall, in the west end, east end, and they already had somewhat of outdoor seating, and they've just expanded it out into the common areas a little bit further.
Right. I want to come back to your prognosis here, because you talk about a lot of businesses having to shut down. In some people's heads, we're saying, yeah, it's going to be bad for maybe another year or so, but then it'll be okay. Do you believe that, or you think it's going to be quite different?
I'm optimistic. I'm hoping that come this time next year, we're 80 to 90% back, hopefully. If we can just get through this year, that's all we're looking for, to get through this year, and we'll do whatever it takes.
What about the longer future of Faneuil Hall Marketplace? Because as you've already hinted, and as many of us already know, this is a tourist or visitor destination. And if you look down the line, even if the health problem itself goes away, aren't there going to be a lot of residual restrictions on that kind of clientele?
I'm sure there is. I hope it won't be, because we need it. We haven't really been able to depend on locals like back in the 80s and the early 90s like we used to. So if we don't make some changes down there operationally, to attract more of the locals, it's going to be tough. It's not going to be the 7th most visited destination tourist location in the world anymore. You know?
Now, the other thing here is how these businesses ripple out into the rest of the economy. You're not on a separate planet. You got people with jobs, and people with jobs, they get paid, and then they spend money. So how would you size up the effect?
I've seen it. The ripple effect's been amazing in a bad way. I mean, every vendor I've talked to, from HVAC, from plumbers, electricians, people working in the restaurant industry, they've been out of work. The people that are in the food distribution business, they've been having the hardest time for the last 3 or 4 months getting product. Getting it, even in the places that are open, they're having a hard time getting the supplies that they needed. A lot of the salesmen are hurting. A lot of the restaurants and bars, liquor salesmen, you name it. It just goes down the list. From, I mean, we had a knife sharpening company that used to come in and once a week sharpen all our knives. We stopped them. We had a grease removal company. We stopped them. Everybody's been affected down the line that has anything to do with the restaurant industry.